Welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things dad, sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, and more. For more information or to get in touch, visit soberdadcrew.com. My guest this episode is Bob Hartman. Along with his wife, Bob is the founder of Alt Bar, a non-alcoholic experience business and bottle shop based in Rochester, New York. We cover a wide range of topics, including discussing mental health and sobriety in your workplace, equitable distribution of household tasks, and how the little things in parenting add up to being the big things. How many kids do you have?
Yeah, so I've got two kids, 5 and 7, Caleb and Joanna. Caleb, the older one, Joanna, the younger, and they're a lot of fun. They're a handful, but they're a lot of fun.
At least school has started.
Yeah. Well, they're in daycare over the summer too, so it's not really any huge difference for us other than they get homework, which is, homework for us more than it's homework for them.
Nights at the dining room table. It's sort of
That's
a
right.
joke in my family. It's like sitting down with me to do homework is not anyone's favorite
No.
activity, depending on their age. I'll rail against the use of the semicolon, or then just kids' math is crazy. Like, who understands kids' math anymore? We're like watching YouTube videos.
Yeah, we haven't gotten into that type of the math yet with them yet, but I've seen and heard it, and it's I'm not looking forward to it. And I was a math guy. I was pretty good with math, but
it's
not
common.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's common. Right. And I have like a wide range between stepkids and older kids, and so I've watched it shift too in that time period. I'm like, wait, how did the 20-year-olds addition and subtraction? It was different than totally what I learned. And then what the younger ones are learning is just, I don't even know. I can't even keep up with the math. And I think I'm kind of a smart guy, and I'm in business development, so I can run a mean Excel spreadsheet, but that does all the math for me. Yeah. So it's sure is interesting homework time. Did you always think you were going to be a dad or want to be a dad?
No, I wasn't against the idea, but it wasn't ever like something I aspired to either. So when we got married young. We were 23 and 24, and we said we were going to wait 5 years before we decided. So we were both kind of on the fence on like, let's take some time. Let's not even decide until we've had some time together and whatnot. And so we did decide to do it. And, for me, it was more a decision to live the American dream or live the societal expectations more than it was like the actual desire for kids, which is, probably not a great thing, but it was, so it was a wake up call when it happened. It was a huge wake up call when we had our kids.
Yeah. Cause I think one thing I want to touch on, and maybe now's the time, is the notion of you have the kids, you get the house, you got to pay for all this, right?
Yeah.
I think we're similar in that we have jobs that support our families, but then we have Sober Dad Crew for me and your side work with Alt Bar, and it's outside of the thing that actually pays the bills.
Yeah, it is. So it's wild. And I'll also say that I'm one of the weird ones where I love my job, and I love, I'm in health insurance actually, which doesn't sound super exciting or fun, but it is for me. It's a lot of fun, and it's, we don't have to get too far into it, but it's, try to provide equitable access to healthcare to all people, and, trying to do what we can to bend the cost curve and to fix some of the issues in a very, very broken system. But that being said, you're right. We did start this side hustle or passion project, Alt Bar. My wife actually dropped down to part-time at her day job so that she can do Alt Bar half-time, part-time. But I don't have any expectations of doing that myself. But it's been a lot of fun and a lot of work.
I mean, your work really does touch on a lot of this, right? Like access to good healthcare has a lot to do with mental health. People, if they need to go to rehab, being able to pay for rehab or go to one that's decent and not just really a terrible place. So, I mean, that's super cool that you have a job that trying to at least nudge the system. It's hard to fix these systems, but I think your ability to try and nudge it exists or make it a little more equitable along the way. So that's super cool. But you probably have to keep the health insurance for the family.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny, or not funny, interesting maybe. When I decided to stop drinking, I thought that I might need to do rehab, or maybe not rehab, but kind of a controlled detox type program. And the one I wanted to do, my health insurance didn't cover, and I was the one leading the, the health insurance decisions. So
Right.
it's kind of this cognitive dissonance, or I'm not sure what the right term is, but I ended up not, just doing a cold turkey, which I've heard you say before, and we probably should reiterate is not the right choice for everybody, but it worked out for me. It is kind of an interesting battle where, trying to, it very much feels like swimming upstream. It very much feels like, and I think the tides are shifting. So it's not like swimming upstream as hard as it has in the past. The things are starting to move in this direction where it's getting easier to do things when it comes to mental health or substance use disorder in the health insurance world, but it's still an afterthought. It's still a not top of mind. We had a head of behavioral health at my organization who used to say that she wanted to put the head back on the body, trying to reconnect the whole person. And the state of New York is doing a lot in that regard, and the federal government through CMS is doing a lot in that regard. But it's one of your earlier podcasts, somebody was talking about the glacial pace of change. And I don't remember who that was, but that really resonated with me because it's slow, but it is moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and I do sort of believe, even beyond health insurance, but largely that the universe bends towards more justice. It's been bumpy as of late, in the world, and that's really hard for people. And I think I work at a relatively small firm. I think we're 40 or 45 employees, and what happens there is the choice of offerings is really tough.
Yeah.
And then it's high deductible stuff, which seems like the trend, like, TMI, but we paid for my vasectomy out of pocket. Like,
Yep.
and I would have thought, man, that must have been a lot cheaper than another baby. Like,
Yes.
that to me, the math just seemed kind of funny, that having somebody give birth must be more expensive than this in-office procedure.
Wildly different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we paid for mine too. And yeah, it doesn't, I understand why, because it has to do with preventive services and IRS tax law and all this other sorts of garbage, but it's backward. It doesn't make logical sense oftentimes. And especially for small group, not to go down too much further down the health insurance rabbit hole, but with small group coverage, it's hard. It's community rated. It's a tough market, and it's unaffordable.
Yeah.
When I look at like all of our lines of business, small group coverage is probably the one I feel the worst about, because it's all on the backs of the small employers and the employees, and there's no federal or state subsidies. There's not the big bargaining power, buying power of the larger groups. It's hard. And then when you get into things like mental health or substance use disorder, it's really hard to make an impact, especially on those high deductible health plans where everything has to be subject to that large deductible, $4, $5, $6, $7,000.
Yeah. Back to vasectomies for 1 second. Was your doctor really chatty? Because mine was like super chatty the whole time. I don't know if he was trying to distract me from like the smoke and the like, when they clamp the thing, they like, they're
Yeah.
really grimacing. He was like chatting away.
Yeah, mine was very chatty. He had classic rock playing the whole time. I sweat through my shirt. I was so nervous. And they actually took my blood pressure beforehand, and they were like, you need to calm down, like, because it was pretty high. But yeah, and the best part was his name was Dr. Gentile, so like very close to
Nice.
Dr. Gentle. And he told me that during the procedure that there's a lot of kids not walking around Rochester because of him. So
There you go. He had like a head count or something.
he did. He actually gave me a number of how many thousands of procedures he had done in the past, and I don't remember what it was offhand, because I don't think I remembered anything from that
And I
other than,
guess he could have some kind of multiplier or something. Like if
yeah.
he'd done like for every vasectomy, it's like 1.3 kids or something.
It's right. I'm sure there's some
Maybe
math
I,
to it.
I I might have the wrong job. Yeah, there was a doctor. in Ithaca who is Dr. Sprinkler, and he wasn't a urologist, but he just missed it. He should have been a
Yeah,
urologist. I was like,
absolutely.
you've like totally missed the boat on that. But
With a name like that, absolutely.
yeah, I mean, Kimball, it's not very interesting for like career directionality, but like that guy, he definitely missed it. Let's talk a little bit more just your story, kind of, how the alcohol use kind of ramped up and when you knew that kind of thing.
Yeah, I always was a bit of a heavy drinker all the way from, late high school into college into, post college. And it came and it went, it was never anytime that I felt like it was starting to get a little out of control, I would like try to rein it in a little bit, and it would last, a few months or whatever, and then things would resume. But it was always kind of acceptable. Understand that you and I may be different in this regard, but I'm very sensitive to how other people view me and perceive me on things. I know it's one of my flaws is that I care a little too much about what other people think. So, I was always very mindful of that, but it really wasn't until we had kids and after the kids were born, after our second was born too, I realized, at one point that I had been drinking every single night for over a year with no hyperbole, no exaggeration, like had not missed a night. So, and it was, getting to the point where it was, I was a big beer guy, so IPAs and, 6, 7, 8% ABV on these IPAs. And so I'm drinking the equivalent of like 8 to 10 beers a night. And I've realized in hindsight, I didn't know it as much at the time, but in hindsight, I was self-medicating and I was self-medicating for mental illness. I have bipolar disorder and anxiety and ADHD, and realized, through not by any self realization or anything or actualization, but through therapy and psychiatry, that I was self-medicating, and because I was running away. I was trying to numb it out. I was trying to not accept that my life had changed, not accept that, I have these responsibilities and that I've got these two people that I make just an enormous impact on and rely on me. And so I was just trying to avoid that realization for as long as I could.
I mean, that totally resonates with me. I mean, it was anxiety and depression for me, and I was even doing therapy but still drinking. And then when I finally like turned the drinking off, that's when I really made progress
Yeah.
and the willingness to do the work, right? It's not therapy's like not supposed to be fun. You're digging into to tough stuff in your life and trying to like learn yourself as a person and kind of be a better person. And I was fortunate to have a therapist that, she'd call me on my shit, right? Like
Yeah.
that kind of matters a lot. But I think as long as you're covering it up with alcohol or another drug, you're just never gonna make your way forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I always get envious of people when they say they quit drinking and then everything got better. Because for me, I quit drinking and everything got so much worse. Because it was like all these things I was running away from, all this hard work you're talking about that I've been pushing off, it all was like right there waiting for me. And so it was, so I say it got worse. Like obviously in the grand scheme of things, in the long run, things got way better, and it's the best choice, one of the best choices I've ever made. But at the time, for those first 6 months, 9 months afterwards, it was hell. It was so, so, so hard because I had to do the hard work and I couldn't run away. Well, I could still run away from it through other means, but I had to, bite the bullet and face it and do the hard work and feel my feelings and ask hard questions like, am I a bad dad? Am I doing this wrong? Am I failing? And things that are very scary to me, having to face those head on. And it's an ongoing process. I still face them. I still want to run away. Now I run away into an ice cream cone instead of a beer bottle, but I still have to do that hard work.
Do you do a program?
I don't. I skipped my story, maybe 7 years ago. It was before kids, so it must have been 8 years ago or so. I had stopped drinking and started doing a 12-step program for about 6 months. And I did the program for maybe a month. It wasn't for me. And I know that it's great for a lot of people. My dad's been in a program for 38 years, and he gave me permission to mention that. He's been sober for 38 years now, and he loves it, and he's got some of his best relationships and things through it. But it didn't. I'm not a. I'm. It has to come from within for me, and it has to be my own decision. And people that are in programs, certainly a big part of the 12 steps. But for me, I needed to do it myself first, by myself, for whatever reason, before bringing others into it.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. I didn't do one either, but I did therapy, and I think people finding the way that works for them is what matters,
Yeah.
and that's some of this connection too with sort of the alcohol free movement. I think is developing is this key component that I think carries through almost all my conversations, and it's community.
Yes.
It's like building this community of folks that have your back, and I have friends who are part of that community who aren't sober, who do drink, but are supportive of me. They know if they come to my house,
Right.
there's not going to be like alcohol there. I don't have friends who like come over and bring beer because they like beer. If they're at my house, they know it's a sober house. Our wedding, we got married in June. There was no alcohol there. And you see that these threads on that, like, what do I do? I'm sober. I'm doing a wedding. I'm like, I didn't even think it was a question. Like, we're
Yeah.
both sober. So it was just not even a thing for us. But I guess some people worry about that.
Yeah, it's funny. It's so ingrained into society. It's something that my wife and I talk about a lot. My wife's not sober, but she's cut way, way back since well, it's a little while after I stopped drinking, but that's her story that she can tell. And we talk about it all the time, that and you've mentioned it earlier on your podcast too, that it's America's, accepted drug. It's America's drug of choice. It's Sunday afternoon with football in the background. I don't know, hopefully you can't hear it, but how many Budweiser commercials are going to play in the course of a 3 hour football game? It's just, so it feels weird not to have it at a wedding, but at the same time, it's like, why is that weird? Like, yeah, nobody's asking why we're not doing lines of Coke, like
Right.
no one,
Right. That's
like,
the meme you see, right? Well, alcohol is the only drug you have to explain
exactly.
not using. And I definitely found that, not in my current job, which I've been really out and open about, being sober. And even I was on a business trip when I was with one of the principals, and the restaurant was really busy, and they're like, you can sit at the bar. He's like, is that okay? I'm like, yeah, it's totally okay. Like,
Yeah,
I don't get triggered. They had a soup, they had a nice alcohol free menu, which was
that's great.
like great. I mean, you're finding more and more of that around, but I've had previous jobs where you do this business travel, and there's definitely people who they do not like that someone's there who is not drinking.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've mentioned it before. It makes you wonder how much you're exposing of their own insecurities. I'm paraphrasing what you've said, but kind of their own thoughts, their own demons that they maybe don't want to deal with when they're uncomfortable. For me, when I quit drinking, it's been about 4 years now. It'll be 4 years on Friday. When I stopped, that very next week, I had a business dinner with a vendor, and we went out to dinner, and that was like one of my big fears, was like, I'm in business, I network, I do these things, and what's that going to be like? Is that going to hurt my career? Is it going to hurt my ability to network? Is it going to hurt, my reputation? It's funny, I had just hired somebody new on my team, and she was with me at that dinner, and I ordered a Jenny NA at the restaurant that we were at. And she had noticed, and she didn't say anything. And then a couple of weeks later, she confesses to me, or not confesses, the wrong word. She confides in me that she had been sober for 20 years, and that it was refreshing for her to see somebody else who was choosing not to drink. And so I had hired her, so she was reporting to me, but she became kind of a mentor for me in terms of how can I learn from you? This is I'm on week 1, week 2, week 3 when we're having this conversation, and she's on year 20. And, how do you do it? How do you go about these things? How do and so that was, you talk about community, and I found community in a lot of interesting places with it, from, like you said, from drinkers and non-drinkers. I was at a board meeting last week and again, or 2 weeks ago, and again, there's a cocktail hour before dinner, and, I'm drinking a Diet Coke, and everybody knows now, that they know that I have alt bar too, but they know that I don't drink, and they don't ask questions. They don't ask why. And that's been really refreshing, to not have it be like a stigma. But it's still kind of a stigma, because are they not asking because out of respect, or are they not asking out of the desire to avoid an uncomfortable conversation too?
And you shouldn't have to explain, right?
Right.
It should just be, and I worked in the wine industry for a while, or the tourism industry in the Finger Lakes related to wine. And interestingly, in one of those jobs, we weren't allowed to drink, even though it was the wine industry. Like because we're also driving everywhere. So it was,
Right.
An issue of like, we don't want to get sued.
Right. Exactly.
But to be the person, grabbing whatever my old default is, like the seltzer with the lime,
Right.
which it's fine, but not that interesting. But just have people let it be and let it go, and not judge it or question it is kind of nice. But I still do think in a lot of workplaces, and I've been listening to this podcast series called Corporate Drinker.
Oh, really?
It talks a lot about that from a lot of vantage points. And one of them touches on sexual harassment in the workplace. And that if you're sending people out and they're drinking a lot, that alcohol does not excuse any behavior, but it can accelerate bad behaviors.
Right.
If you're a workplace and you want to not get into trouble, maybe a good way to start is to minimize alcohol at company events. And I also see with our sort of younger staff, I'm old enough now that there's like younger staff that I could be their dads, that they have a little less interest
Absolutely.
in alcohol. And they also have a different view of work.
Yeah.
People in their 20s are much more like, I did the work, and I'm going home.
Right.
And I don't need to go like hang out.
Right. Yeah, it's through Alt Bar. We've actually done a couple of company events now where we've had non-alcoholic options for people, like at a company event, and it's been so refreshing for me, working the events to see, like, people that just appreciate that they have the ability to engage and participate and be included in this event, and not have alcohol, not have an alcoholic drink in their hand. And so one event we did, we catered, and it was, just a sidebar in addition to the alcoholic bar. But another event we did was a young professionals event at a local bank, and it was just totally dry. And it was just so cool to be like, there was some people there like, oh, what is this? Can I get an alcoholic one? Or like, does this really taste like the real thing? And the phrase "the real thing" kind of bothers me a little bit, but they long story short, they loved it. For by and large, there was always going to be haters, but there's, by and large, people were surprised and impressed. And something that Ian talked about in one of your previous podcasts was just how far the non-alcoholic industry has come in the last few years, where you can make a well thought out craft cocktail that does not have alcohol in it, that is complex and deep and satisfying, versus your Shirley Temples or whatever, or even, not trying to crap on your seltzer and lime, but that there are other alternatives out there. So if you want something a little bit more different, and that's not for everyone either, because we've had people come up to our events. I'll always remember this one woman who came up to one of our events and like looked at it and smelled it and just had to walk away. She said, "I'm sorry, I can't." Just even seeing a non-alcoholic gin and tonic was just really triggering for her, and
Yeah.
that keeps me up at night. Like the idea that we would be the reason for someone's relapse is just terrifying to me.
Well, and just for me and like in my family, when we talk about it, we have much less interest in the real things that have the alcohol taken out. Like I'm interested in like seed lip and things like
Mm.
that that's created a sort of new thing.
Yeah,
Like I don't need something that tastes exactly like gin. I like the idea that it's something brand new.
yeah,
Um,
yes,
but but because I can see that people, if you were like a tequila drinker and that was your trigger, or a vodka drinker, to actually have the actual thing could be really triggering. But I get it that you must have felt pretty bummed out to be like, oh, we were trying to do this like cool thing.
yeah. It's a fine line, Like I said, it keeps me up at night. Not It literally kept me up a couple of nights when we first launched, but it doesn't literally keep me up at night anymore. But it's just something that is always in the back of my mind that you don't. We're trying to do, like you said, a cool thing. We're trying to do something that helps people, and the last thing we want to do is hurt people in the process.
Yeah, I
But
mean, I also think that woman, good for her. She just knows,
yeah,
and so the non-alc movement isn't for everybody,
right,
right? For some people, any notion of a cocktail, no matter if it's an alcohol removed bourbon or something totally different, or even, a drink that's in a cocktail glass that
right,
doesn't have any of these sort of new ingredients in it. Because you can do a lot. We just had one at my house the other night, and it was coconut water and seltzer and, muddled blackberries and mint and a little vinegar. Is incredible. There's nothing in there that imitated any alcohol, but for some people, that in the glass, the sort of fancy glass,
yeah,
could bother them, and so you have to sort of know thyself as part of
exactly,
that, but also accept there's a lot of room for variation out there. Like Ian touched on, he's like, his AA experience talked about this negative view of non-alcoholic beer. I mean,
right,
if you're sober and you can have that, cool. If
yep,
you can't, cool. Hopefully you find another alternative out there. Let's talk about a little more about Alt Bar. We're like kind of dancing around it, but
sure.
what's the origin story?
Yeah, so I had stopped drinking 4 years ago, like I said, and it was, let's make sure my math lines up here. Maybe 2 years later, I had it was during COVID, so it must have been a year and a half later. I mean, during the heat of COVID, the height of COVID. So maybe a year later, did a non-alcoholic happy hour online with some folks, and I met Chris Marshall, who you also had on the podcast
Yeah,
through
cool
that.
guy.
Real cool guy. I actually went down to Austin a couple of months ago and went to Sands Bar and talked to him. But so I'm like, oh, Sands Bar, that's cool. So I started following Sands Bar on Instagram. Fast forward another year, and I'm seeing that he's doing the Sands Bar Academy thing, and I'm like, huh, that's cool. That's a neat idea. And I've got no hospitality industry experience. Had never even thought about, other than, in college, everybody thinks about opening a bar at some point.
Right.
It's always like the
The greatest career choice ever,
exactly. It's
except for
it's
the
the
hours.
That's right. Everyone has that aspiration as they're drunk one night. But the idea just kind of like, kind of plugged into my head there and started to kind of fester, like, well, what if Rochester could support that? And then, I'm again, no industry experience. I'm thinking I'd love to support it financially. I'd love to be an investor. I'd love to help out some way. And the more I'm waiting and the more I'm thinking, the more I'm like, nobody's going to do this if we don't. And so fast forward, we attended. I decided to attend Sands Bar Academy. My wife and I both Sands Bar Academy, and more as an experiment. Like let's just see what we can learn. Like that's it's not a ton of money. Let's see what we can learn. Let's see what we can do. And we the final exam, not to be a spoiler for anybody who's thinking about Sandsbar Academy, is to host a pop-up. And so my wife and I are both very much all or nothing kind of people. Like if we're going to do something, we're going to do it right. So we decided let's see what we can do, and we ended up selling out our pop-up in Rochester. So we had 80 tickets that we did, and we sold all 80 tickets, and we actually had a few more than that show up, and it was a huge success. And so we kind of looked at each other afterwards and we said, I guess we're doing this now. And so, we've been doing non-alcoholic pop-ups since December of 21. Yeah, because we did it all of 22 and this is 23. Yep. So December of 21, and we're right now looking for a permanent location. We're in pre-lease negotiations right now, actually, with a spot that we're optimistic on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Rochester's not super far from me. I mean, I've been looking more and more at how to do it. I live in Aurora. It's really pretty small and it's
Yeah.
mostly Wells College. So there's not a lot of venue spaces, but Ithaca has a lot. And trying to find ways to host pop-ups there. And I've talked to a few restaurants and I DJ a little bit. So trying to make it a fun, cool place for people to connect and have low pressure, or for people who are just starting dating, like you don't
Yeah.
have to like mix that world with alcohol, right? You can go out and have a nice thing and a nice event, and you don't have to worry about drinking and driving or any
Right.
of that kind of stuff. Now you guys have a bottle shop as well.
We do, yeah. So this whole experience is so multifaceted. Like there's so much that I'd love to talk about with it, that even just what you were just saying, reminds me of. But from the economic model perspective, we're at a point now where we don't think we could sustain it with just bar service. We don't think at this point, at least, maybe as the movement continues to grow and people get more and more comfortable with it and the word gets out more and we have a physical location, things will change. But right now we have kind of a three-tiered business model on Alt Bar. The first is the bar service, the pop-up events. The second is we're, retail, selling bottles of non-alcoholic spirits, non-alcoholic wines, non-alcoholic beers, and canned non-alcoholic cocktails. And the third is catering, doing those corporate events or weddings or, whatever, where we can provide a non-alcoholic alternative. But what you were saying about like first dates and stuff, my passion and the love I have for it really comes from the bar service side of things, when you're creating this inclusive environment of just comfort and the ability for people to do things that they never thought they were going to be able to do again or ever do. So we had a couple that had been, they were sober when they met. They were sober through dating. They were sober when they were married. They were married 10 years. And they said, this is the first time we've ever been on a date in a bar in our entire relationship. We had another couple that it was their first date and they were at Alt Bar. And it's just so, Ian talked about the ROI of joy. And I thought that was the best way to kind of phrase it, is there's just, I've got this, three-tier economic model and blah, blah, blah. But really, like, as long as we're not going out of business and, we're not like just bleeding ourselves dry with everything else we've got going on, just the looks on people's faces and the gratitude that they have when they're at our establishment is enough to keep me going. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, and I think, we touched on community before, but I just think, and it's beyond, community is beyond, right, this whole conversation of alcohol, non-alcohol. Lack of community is and connection, and this siloed thing is really impacting our country right now.
Yeah,
That people, and I talk about it a lot on this, people do not talk to people that kind of aren't in their political silo. And
right.
I was at a birthday party yesterday and I was like, okay, I definitely do not politically agree with all these people, for sure, for certain. And I'm going to talk to them, and I'm going to talk to them about community and connections. And it was like a 7-year-old's birthday party with the pinata massacre and like little kids running around. It was like kid mayhem with 7-year-old boys. It's just like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I'm standing out of the way. But I got an opportunity to sort of talk to other folks who are parents and connect
Yeah.
with them. And, the baseline is like we love our kids, right? It does sometimes sound so simplistic, but that's a pretty major thread, right? We all love our kids. We're all just
Right.
like trying to
Right.
support our families in sometimes a machine that's difficult. It's expensive to
Yeah.
live right now. That notion of the American dream and buying a house and all that. It's getting harder and harder for people.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and from the alt bar perspective, what you're saying is totally true. And it's one way for us to build community, and then another way is just bonding over a shared desire not to drink. And one of the things that we always like kind of say, it's kind of like a tagline almost, is we're never going to ask you why. Sometimes they volunteer that information, and so we know, being the bartenders, that they're pregnant or an athlete in training or somebody who's just never drank or somebody who just went to a bar, drank, came to our establishment to extend their night, with some friends, and then I was going to go to another alcoholic bar afterwards, just as a way to extend. And just the communities that we've just been able to see firsthand is just, you're sitting multi-generational at alt bar next to each other and just chatting with each other and talking to each other. And it's that one of your previous guests was talking about like how some of the most important events in American history, started in taverns and pubs and bars, and that's something that Chris Marshall was saying in the Sands Bar Academy, and it's true. Like, you could just see it, like this community and different opinions and different generations and different backgrounds and different ethnicities all coming together and just sharing an experience. And, I feel like after choosing to stop drinking 4 years ago, I've lost that. I've lost that experience. I've lost that ability. And that was really what, I guess I never answered your question on what drove us starting Alt Bar. Was selfish. I wanted that again. I wanted that again for me. And so if nobody else is going to do it, then I'm going to do it. And we're gonna make that experience available again for people to not just selfishly, but then to build community, to meet people that are not like you. Even working alt bar, I've met, so many other people that have so many different views from me, not necessarily politically, but just different worldviews, different backgrounds, in terms of like bartenders that we've hired. Like it's just not my normal sphere of, not my normal bubble, where I'm living the American dream with two kids in the suburbs, and I'm hiring these bartenders that are living paycheck to paycheck, and we're chatting, we're talking, and we're talking about health insurance, we're talking about the struggles they have being uninsured or underinsured, and it's just been, I'm rambling a little bit, but it's just been so eye-opening for me. I feel like a richer, better person having had these relationships with people and learning about other people through Alpar.
And I think these COVID years, and personally, I was one. I got it. Like, we're sheltering. We're trying to figure out how to keep everybody healthy. Like, I supported that. I just got my booster vaccine Friday. I was like, bring it on.
Yep.
Like, I'll take them all. I want to be out in the world, but I think we became out of practice a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I used to go to tons and tons of concerts, and like I've been to one. I
Yeah.
haven't been I haven't been back in a movie theater. Movies weren't like a huge thing for me, but and there's not really a community space, but theaters are really struggling everywhere. All these places that people did come together, the theater, and you talk to people before the show or in intermission, or bars and restaurants. A lot of the traditional gathering places, even churches struggled, right? Churches
Yeah.
went to like Zoom church, I think. All that stuff became really hard for people. We were sort of desperately trying to find ways to like keep that thread connected. And so now we're coming out of it, and I think we're stumbling a little bit, but hopefully we're sort of moving forward, and things like Alt Bar are cool. And I know one thing I wanted to go back to is you have this very inclusive sort of view of
Yeah.
alcohol free. right? You could be an athlete or pregnant and I really appreciated that because I think sometimes, and I think even on this show and its name about sobriety, not everyone is actually sober, right?
Right.
In the sense of needing to not drink. There's a whole bunch of people out there that just choose not to for health reasons or just they don't like it or religiously or culturally. It's not something they do,
Yep.
but everybody wants community. Maybe like the
Exactly.
Unabomber didn't really want community, but
Right.
like, there's some exceptions to the rule, but most people crave community and crave connection.
Exactly. Yeah, and the bell curve of humanity, the three standard deviations either way if people want community. And it doesn't matter why you're not. That was kind of nerdy. It doesn't
It's
matter
okay. We
why
like nerdy.
why you're choosing not to drink. And even if it's just for a night, like, I don't remember the exact stat off the top of my head. My wife is a professor of marketing, and she'll yell at me later in terms of not remembering the stat. But most people who buy non-alcoholic spirits and non-alcoholic drinks still drink.
I think
It's
it was 80. I think Ian
Yeah,
said something like it's a hugely high percentage. I mean,
yeah,
it's like beyond meat too, right? Like most of the people who buy
right,
that stuff are actually they're not trying to become vegan.
exactly.
They just want some other alternatives, healthy alternatives.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter why you're choosing not to. The reality is you're choosing not to, and I'm choosing not to, and it may be for wildly different reasons. But you and I can bond over the same. Maybe bond is too strong of a word, but we can share that experience. We can share in community with each other that we're both choosing not to drink at this moment in time, and it's even though it's a growing movement, it is still kind of countercultural. It is still kind of, unique to sit in a non-alcoholic bar in the middle of a very alcohol saturated country in an alcohol saturated world.
Yeah, and it is an interesting time, as we're looking at like marijuana getting legalized.
Mhm.
And I'm certainly not in favor of people being incarcerated. I don't think that's how you help people get better. I'm not someone interested in pot at all. I don't, I try not to judge people who are, but there's this time when this alcohol free stuff is coming up at the same time we're looking at
Yeah,
legalization of other things. It's, sort of an interesting time in that.
totally. Yeah, and what's weird to me is not weird in a judgment, just genuinely weird, is that a lot of places where you can get non-alcoholic spirits are like dispensaries or like, maybe not dispensaries, but like places that promote that lifestyle. And, like even in Florida, there was, I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but there's a non-alcoholic bottle shop in Florida that also, you know, promotes that type of a lifestyle and wants to, it's Florida, so they can't do it, but they want, if they're able to, they would sell drinks with THC in them. And so it's kind of this, the movements have kind of been woven together in some ways. And we get asked a lot, like, are you going to sell drinks with THC? Are you going to sell cannabis products, if and when that becomes possible? And while we don't have a problem with it either, it really goes against our vision of inclusivity. So we don't
Yeah.
want people to feel uncomfortable. Like it's all about comfort to us. And we're never going to please 100% of the people, but we want to be as inclusive as possible, and that would be a step in the wrong direction in our view on inclusivity.
Yeah, I would think you would lose more people than you would gain in that.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
I mean
do
that's
too.
my gut
Yeah.
reaction to that.
Yeah. But all that to say it's you're right. It's kind of an odd time where they're kind of growing at the same time, to the point where, going back into business speak, for a minute, big publicly traded organizations like Constellation Brands are investing in cannabis organizations to diversify their portfolio because they're looking at, the more people use cannabis, the less they drink. And so if I'm Constellation Brands and my entire business is surrounded around alcohol, owning wine companies and beer companies like Corona or Mondavi, I better get into the cannabis industry too, because that's a competitor of mine now. So it's wild to me. It's just a wild time.
That's capitalism, baby, right? Like
That is.
I mean, it will. The alcohol free spirits, you will see. Right now it's kind of like in its indie rock, punk rock
Yep.
stage a
Yep.
little bit, which is it's kind of a cool time to be part of that and connecting with that. But you will start to see, I mean, I guess like Heineken Zero, right? There's a
Yep.
lot of those companies that are already going in that direction, but
Yeah.
there'll be, and it's a blessing and a curse, right? There'll be more and more and more options and opportunities, but you also don't want to see the people at the forefront of these things kind of get pushed out because a Constellation brand, which is giant, just has the resources to saturate the market.
Yeah. And you can see, the non-alcoholic beer space is more mature than the non-alcoholic spirit space. It's still a new space, but you could, like you said, you've got Heineken Zero, you've got Budweiser Zero, you've got Guinness now with a 0%. Corona has a 0% or 0.5. I shouldn't say 0%. Some of them are 0.5. Even Athletic Brewing, which is kind of like that indie startup, whatever, they've been through a Series A, I think it's been.
Okay.
And they've got some big investors that are pouring a lot of money into them. It's absolutely already happening. The people that are in capitalism and good at that game are good at that game, and they're going to find ways to take advantage.
And I guess if you are a firm that's interested in doing investment rounds like Series A, for those that don't know that kind of entrepreneur and investor lingo, right? Those round of outside investors who they're hoping for a payout later. I mean,
Right.
that's how that works, but it also helps those businesses grow.
Right. Absolutely.
So,
And that's the double-edged sword is Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch is getting to the game. And then on the flip side, we went out to dinner last night and I was able to have a Stella Artois Zero, non-alcoholic Stella Artois at this nice restaurant. So it was like, it's overall, it sucks to see the small guys getting pushed out. And at the same time, it helps on the macro side, it move faster. So it's kind of, it's a both
and I think there's always room for the indie, be it
yeah.
the indie bookstore, the indie band. There's like tons of breweries. People start independent breweries that do very well outside of the large corporations. So I think there's always room for that and always people who seek it out.
Yeah, I mean, the best non-alcoholic beers I've ever had have both been from independent breweries. One was Thimble Island, I think it was called. It was in Connecticut. Great New England, non-alcoholic New England IPA they had, and a great pale ale that they had. And then the other one is Other Half, right in West Bloomfield in the Finger Lakes area between you and I. And Other Half's a big independent brewery, but they're still independent. And they made it just a killer New England IPA that was NA. So it's still there. It's still, like you said, there's still the opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm just excited because it just really does seem like the fuse on the rocket's lit.
Oh yeah.
Like in a way, I think the years of COVID moved a lot of people into some of this entrepreneurial space. In a lot of entrepreneurial spaces, they were home, even outside of work. They had tons of time. For me at that time, before I met my wife, there's weeks when it was just me and the cat, right? I had a lot of time. Netflix was definitely growing boring. So you try different things. I was making my own beard oils and doing other things. And then you're like, okay, how do I like break into this? I mean, because I'm always interested in business and entrepreneurship and admire entrepreneurship and kind of the guts to jump into it. There's always a little bit of leap of faith because as much as you analyze the market, what you think you can do, what you think your growth is going to be, the reality is not always aligned
Right.
with that.
Again, the business perspective, and this is, you're going to have to get listed as a business podcast after this session, I guess, between you and I. But our biggest competitor is Wegmans, not the liquor store. We look at like Wegmans, is now carrying, at least by us, non-alcoholic wines.
Yes, they have
Um,
like the Free and Ithaca. And I think there's a couple.
yeah, they have like
I was just looking at
Luminara,
it
which is pretty
yesterday. A
good.
couple of
Yeah.
mixed cocktails in the can
Yep.
things.
And they had for a while on their shelves, they had a spot for the Ritual non-alcoholic spirits.
Oh,
They
okay.
had a spot on the shelves. They never stocked it, but they had handwritten, and it didn't have a barcode or anything. But because I shop at Wegmans and
You
I'm
live
in
in the
business.
mothership of Wegmans.
I do.
People, if you're
Yeah.
not like from New York or I guess the surrounding states now, Wegmans is like our super deluxe giant grocery store
Yeah. It's like our
who
Whole
is
Foods.
very nimble. A beer high end craft beer store opened in Ithaca and was doing very well. And within months of that, Ithaca Wegmans devoted what is a huge portion of their store
Yep.
to a craft beer section. And I got kind of pissed because I was like, oh,
Yep.
I mean, not surprising because they're in it to make money. But I was like, man, that guy just like opened
Yeah.
his little entrepreneurial thing and now you're just going to crush him.
Yeah. No, they have no mercy. Like I mean, yeah, they have a cult following here in New York for those of you that aren't familiar with it, but they also have no mercy when it comes to competition. They just crush the competition when they see small stuff like that pop up.
I guess my hopes of getting Wegmans to sponsor this podcast are now dead, but
I'm
that's
sorry.
okay. Danny, dude, I like your sub with its multiple meats on it, but we still
Yeah.
love you. I still shop there.
I shop there exclusively, so I guess I shouldn't criticize something that I support, but
And good cheese
uh,
section.
that's a phenomenal cheese section. It's a low barrier of entry, and it's a growing space, and so from a competitive perspective, it's kind of the Wild West. And so, we did our pro forma, we've done our business assessments, our business plan, and we've looked at the finances, and we think it's a viable business, but it could all be flipped on its head, you know, because anybody, you don't need a liquor license. Anybody can start
Right.
carrying this stuff.
Yeah, which is a good thing. I think the one place and they went out of business in Ithaca and it was mostly like high-end natural like kind of
Mm,
beauty products, but they had
mm,
some coffees and they had I don't even remember what it was, but they had like one
yeah,
and they were a little all over the place, but I think mostly they were a victim of COVID. They
sure.
like just opened 6 months before everything shut
It's
down and
tough.
they got screwed for that. Let's talk about dad stuff again
Yeah,
a little
yeah,
more. I mean, I think it's pretty clear for most people that sobriety makes you a more patient
yeah,
human being, but parenting is still just hard
yeah.
sometimes. They know how to push your buttons. Like, what do you do when they're just pushing your buttons? Because, like, obviously, we've all get pushed to the point where, like, oh, you push it just one more time, and now there's steam coming out of my ears.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I've totally figured it out. It's so much fun and it's so infuriating at the same time. It's patience, you mentioned patience and you're absolutely right. Like patience is like probably like the number one attribute you have to have, I feel like. And it's unfortunately something I don't have a lot of just in general in my life. So, for me, I have to remind myself as much as possible to see things through their point of view, to see things through their worldview. Like I don't do great with big emotions. I repress my own emotions. I don't like feeling emotions. I don't like when other people feel their emotions. So, when you have little ones that all they know right now at this point in time is rage, or all they know at this point in time is sadness, you know,
Right. Or
um,
the emotions, they put them on 100% regard. If
yeah,
it's joy, it's 100%. If it's
yeah,
anger, it's 100%. There's not like any moderation.
no. It's like that movie Inside Out. Like they are just like they are that entire emotion at that point in time. And, so for me, I need it's an intellectual exercise. I have to remind myself this is like try to think of the angriest you've ever been in your life. This is how they're feeling right now. Like or the saddest or the happiest or whatever. and that gives me an extra jolt of patience usually. And I'll be honest, I'm on meds. Like I have meds that help me, and it's funny because my wife can tell when I've missed a dose or something because I'm less patient, and that's the first thing that goes for me is, when dealing with mental health and my own illness, it's the alcohol actually gave me more patience because I was not there. So I was patient but
Right.
not present. And so now that then I was present and not patient. And now that we found the right balance of meds and therapy and sobriety, I can be both patient and present, but it's still a struggle. It's still the number one thing I probably deal with is my patience.
Yeah. I mean, I always think parenting is the coolest, hardest thing
Yeah.
ever. And for me, and I think for most of us, the thing that probably we want to do best. And I
Yeah.
always put a lot of pressure on myself to be sort of perfect. And I had to learn that no one's seeking perfection.
Yeah.
And there's even this Brene Brown, she has this
Yeah.
audio book, The Gift of Imperfect Parenting,
Yeah.
which was super useful to me because your kids don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be there. They need you to
Right.
show up, right? They need you not to be a dick. But it's just not always easy. You work all day, you're tired,
Yeah.
like your patience is up. Sometimes I get home from work, I'm like, well, I've used up all my patience and all my organizational skills today,
Yes. Yes.
but I have the rest of the day and family that I need to be present for and patient for, and hopefully at least a little organized for. But
Yeah.
it is not always easy.
Yeah, I'm gonna look up that book. That sounds like a great book. I haven't read a ton of Brene Brown. I've heard some of her stuff. I've listened to some of her stuff, but I'm gonna check that out because it's for a perfectionist like myself, it's a struggle. Like you said, you want to be the perfect dad, and there is no such thing. I mean, the most perfect dad I've ever seen is Bandit from Bluey, and even Bandit screws up sometimes. So it's like, if this dog fictional dad character that is a way better dad than I'll ever be can screw up, then I guess I can too.
It's because you're not a fictional dog. I
It's
mean,
a
right?
lot
Like
of
the
my
bar is
life's
high.
problems. Yeah, a lot of my life's problems would be fixed if I was a blue fictional dog.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like, what else could you really want? But I
Yep,
think it is right. It's showing up,
yep,
showing that you care, going to the game
yep,
after work when you're tired and really you just want to like sit down and read a book or watch a show or not do anything. Your time is not always your own. And I think especially when babies come, for guys who generally tend to carry less of the weight of household work and chores. I mean, I think that's generally like a true thing, even when it's a more equitable relationship. I think a lot of time dudes struggle with that change. They're not the center of attention
no,
anymore in the house. And that doesn't always help the male ego.
no, no, and I've got one of those too. Definitely, definitely not. And then it's even things like, you talk about like the equity in the house, and it's like the mental load too, and then you're taking on this additional mental load. But for me at least, my spouse takes on more of that than I do, and it's it's hard. It's just such an adjustment. But then you see them. This morning I took them out to the kids and I out to breakfast, and the look in my daughter's face when this pancake that was half the size of her shows up. Just silly little moments like that, and all of a sudden it's like, this is nice. This is
But
this is this is
she'll
wonderful.
remember that, you're going to get sometime in the next year or two, like, daddy, remember that pancake.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
and I think that's a lot of parenting too. It's so much the little things.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes big things matter, but a lot of times it's the little things. I mean, I'm 52. What do I remember from my dad was every night he read to us before bed.
Mm. Mhm.
He traditional 9 to 5 job, but that was his reconnect every night. In an individual sense, that's not a big thing. It's just a story or two. but year over year, all those little things,
Right.
the pancakes in a weird way because of the generation, like he was on vacation, the breakfast guy. I don't know how like dudes became the vacation breakfast guy, but
Yeah.
that was like a thing when I was growing up. Dads couldn't do much, but they could make some pancakes.
They could make a killer egg.
Yep. And bacon. I don't know. I mean, I do a ton of the cooking in my house also because that's a stress relief for me.
Yeah.
It's nice at the end of a day to kind of go and be creative in the kitchen. It's nice to make food that your family likes, or at least some of the people.
Yeah.
They
I
don't
was gonna
always
say,
like
if you could
they
figure
don't
out how to
always
do
like
that,
I
let me
do not
know.
have a universal success record with making food that all children like. If I did, I would be very rich.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say I would pay for that. I would definitely, because even if it's their favorite food, apparently it's not tonight. I don't know why, but
Yeah.
I
Wait,
don't
yeah,
like
you
chicken.
just ate that every night for an
Yeah,
entire month, and now
I
you
hate
don't
hot
like it?
dogs. That's what
Yeah.
what my son said to me us last night. I hate hot dogs. Like, what are you talking about? And then he ate two hot dogs, so
All
whatever.
right, there you go. That goes back to that kid thing. And my youngest son has gotten very into skateboarding, and he wanted to go out yesterday. He wanted to go out. He wanted to go out. He wanted to go out sort of in the afternoon before this birthday party. And then he's like, yeah, I don't want to go. But I was like, I am saving space for skateboarding time
Yeah,
because he is gonna want to go. What he's saying is, I don't want to go right now. I'm watching Unspeakable,
right.
which is this weird YouTube thing that I don't know. I don't understand. I'm old. But right, he's saying like I want to do the thing I'm doing now, and I'm gonna want to go. He just doesn't know it. But you, as a parent, you got to kind of think ahead and be like, no, they're still gonna want to do that.
That's right.
They're
That's
not
right.
gonna not want to do the thing they love. They just want to do every possible thing that they want to do.
Yeah, and it's finding that balance between hearing them and listening to them and still knowing better, you know.
Right. And then sometimes doing it all when you're exhausted. Because that's the
Exactly.
other parenting thing, especially when they're young. I remember when my now 16-year-old, she was born. I was just back at work. And that was a time where I was unpaid for me. Like my
Mhm.
staff member who's 25 or 26, he and his wife just had a baby. And now he's got New York State paid
Yep.
family leave. I was like, oh
Yep.
shit, I didn't have that at all.
No.
And so I think it took a couple weeks with each kid. But I just remember being at this board meeting, and I worked at the Economic Development Agency. So like the board of this organization was like bank presidents,
Hmm.
senior level people at Cornell University, really, really high level people.
Hmm.
And the head of Borg Warner manufacturing here, which makes like auto parts, was talking. It was so dry. And my head, I was doing that thing where your head
Yep.
falls down, and it was a lunch thing. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going down. I'm gonna face plant into this plate of food because I am
Yep.
so exhausted right now. And that's as like the guy, right?
Yeah.
So I can't even imagine. And like, that for their mom was a C-section. And I was like, should not complain about being tired, but definitely you're just tired.
No, it's the hardest job you'll ever have on the lowest with the lowest amount of resources you'll ever have, in terms of emotional energy, physical energy, spiritual energy.
Yeah. And that's, for us as like professional people with professional incomes. I mean, I just always think about folks who are working, hourly wage job, not to mention in, COVID, but people who don't get sick days, don't
No.
get sick days for their kids. I can just work from home, right? Like if
Right.
I really need to, I just plug my laptop in at home and I'm good to go.
Right.
And I think last winter we all got sick with something. It wasn't COVID, but it like ripped through the house one day, pretty much just in bed. I did do one work call in my pajamas, but the next day I felt like better, but didn't. And it was a Friday and I didn't want to go in. I was like, I feel well enough to work, being cautious. I don't want to get anyone else sick. So I just plugged in,
Yeah.
and I could just work from home and I didn't have to take a sick day or a PTO day because, right, those are vacation days when you're under PTO. Vacation days and sick days are sort of in the same bucket.
Yep.
But that's really privilege and a blessing to be able to just pivot that way.
It totally is. So I say, I quit drinking right before COVID hit. And 4 months, 5 months, 6 months before that. And then the first 3 months of COVID, my wife and I both worked full time. We were both fortunate enough to be able to work from home full time. And the daycares were closed. And we had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old at home with us. And I say that those are the worst 3 months of my life because just trying to work full time, trying to manage my own mental illness, trying to keep a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old alive and somewhat entertained. And yet, you're absolutely right. It's bundled in privilege. It's bundled in like we still had an income for those 3 months. We still had health insurance for those 3 months. We had everything we needed for those 3 months except for a babysitter.
And a little sanity.
And a little sanity, exactly. But yeah, it totally is privilege though.
And I do think it's just so important to acknowledge that in a time when a lot of people just don't have that. I mean, it touches back to your work and trying to sort of create more equity
Yeah.
in the healthcare realm, or the architecture firm I work in. A big part of what we do is affordable housing and also healthcare thing. So in Rochester, we did like the Highland Hospital Patient
Oh, really?
Power Edition. That's like our project.
That's awesome.
But one of our subspecialties is behavioral health units,
Mm,
and we make them beautiful.
that's wonderful.
And we also designed the detox. If you listen to my interview with Angela, who
Yep.
was the executive director of that organization, like that was our project. And I remember
Yep.
walking through there, and all the beds had handmade quilts. Just because people are in a hard place doesn't mean they don't deserve like beauty and compassion.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
I feel like because of where my office is in Ithaca, and you probably see this in Rochester, and people see this everywhere, a lot of the visible addiction stuff you see, the folks on the street, a lot of people are easily able to write that off.
Right.
And that's one reason I talk about publicly
Yeah.
being in recovery, is because the picture of that is so much bigger. It's like you and I represent. Like if we were just walking down the street, people wouldn't be like, "Oh, those dudes are like in recovery."
Right.
And it's just such an important thing to tell that. And I get in some 12-step programs, you were historically and traditionally not supposed to talk about it. But to me, being the person that gets up, like in my community where I've built most of my career and people know me, and standing up and saying like, this is who I am, this is what I've struggled with,
Yeah.
it is huge to get rid of stigma.
Yeah, and it's hard. It takes a lot of courage, I feel like, to do that, and I commend you for it. For me, I'm just starting to open up about my mental health and about my mental illness. I started a mental health ERG, an employee resource group at work, and co-chaired by somebody else also who's just amazing. And it's funny to me that I'm more comfortable talking about that than I am about not drinking alcohol. And so I'm trying to take steps in that direction to be more public and I mean, I'm public enough. We own Alt Bar. We've been in the newspaper. I guess
You're not hiding.
I guess I'm not hiding. Yeah. But it's still something that like I'm more comfortable saying the word bipolar than I am saying alcoholic.
Which is
Yeah.
interesting, right? But it is interesting to be like, that's easier to say
Yep.
than alcoholic or alcohol use disorder or whatever it
Right.
is.
Right.
Which is also, I think, sometimes why developing the language around alcohol free is
Mm-hmm.
pretty great, because in some, at least as a broad statement, because you don't always have to say why, nor should
Right.
you be expected to.
Right.
So if you're more comfortable just saying I'm alcohol free, people
Yep.
are going to think whatever they think, but it's kind of a nice language. It fits with your business,
Yeah.
right? That you're trying to create a place that's just alcohol free for anyone, whatever the reason. Or
Right.
if they're not even alcohol free, if they're alcohol free for that 60 minutes that they're in there,
Exactly.
or they're alcohol free for that 60 minutes because they want to check it out, or it might be the place that helps them get alcohol free because they can do it without losing community.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's, I say I choose not to drink or I don't drink. I very rarely say the A word. But it's it is. I don't know. They probably need a therapy session or two to unpack all of that, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I think whatever really works for people, and I think it can shift. I mean, there was a period of time I just talked about being straight edge as sort of a punk guy. I was like, okay, I can sort of define sobriety in this sort of political music
Yeah,
movement.
yeah,
Felt really comfortable for me in the early years. And then, then along the way I kind of shifted. And I think I've told this story before on this show. I remember before, like in the hiring process of this job,
yeah.
I posted something on LinkedIn about, I guess it would have been 11 years or 12 years. I can't remember. Sober. And I threw it up on LinkedIn. And then I had this panicked moment about, oh my God, I just put this on my LinkedIn and I'm in the middle of an interview process for a job. And then I thought, well, they don't hire me for that. That's probably better.
Yeah,
Like I don't even want to work at that place. And so now I'm at a place when I'm at a conference with one of the principals of the firm who's like, is it okay to sit at the bar? Like
yeah,
I felt really respected in that in my choice. And it's been good to be able to just sort of be open about that. And what I think is a very unique, like I'm fortunate with where I work and it's real attention to workplace culture and the importance of that and the individual and how the individual ties into the mission of the organization, and that like makes us better. Not all places are like that.
no, no, and you're right. You're fortunate to work in that type of environment. I'm fortunate as well in mine, and I think it's important for you and I and others like us to speak out about it and to be public about it, because both being in positions of management or upper management, it's we need to use the platform we have to help advance, for those that are not able to speak their truth. I feel strongly about that. That's why I started the mental health ERG, because sadly it was apparently it was somebody tried to start it a few years previous and they weren't able to. And so, I worked through the right channels to get it going, but I wonder sometimes if it was because it was me in the position I'm in, if that's why we were able to start it. And so now, unfortunate, like it shouldn't be that way, but that's the way the world works. So should I start a substance use disorder ERG? Like, would that be wild to have a workplace employee resource group about, people that have, addictions? It shouldn't be, but how many of them are out there?
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's an awesome place to finish up as well. So thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more information, for links to any music or books we talked about, or to buy some Sober Dad Crew merchandise, please visit soberdadcrew.com.